now over the Gallipo Bridge. Sue, I'll have another update for you within 10 minutes.
Thanks very much. Lucie Colson at the traffic center, heading up to 22 minutes past 4 o'clock. Well, what is the relationship between gentrification of a neighborhood and food? That's a question two researchers have spent the summer looking at in the neighborhoods of NDG St. Raymond and St. Henri. Tonight they're presenting their findings at the St. Henri Historical Society. The report's called Gentrification and Food, What's for Dinner in NDG and St. Henri. It's a collaboration between Université de Montréal and the University of London in the UK. Aaron Vansintjan is a PhD candidate with the University of London, one of the authors of the report, and he joins me in studio. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Sue.
So why did you want to study gentrification in these two neighborhoods?
Well, they've St. Henri especially has been in the news quite a lot lately, with people kind of getting really worked up about these high-end new restaurants that have been moving in. But at the same time, you don't necessarily hear so much about, well, what are the kind of low-income, the older residents, what are they feeling about it? What are they experiencing? How does it affect them? And we talk a lot about gentrification as these kind of young urban professionals moving in, pushing people out, but we don't necessarily hear the other side of the story that much.
So what did you do? How did you go about compiling the information?
So we talked to politicians, community workers, even a real estate agent, and then we kind of spent our time walking around the neighborhood. We even attended some gatherings for senior groups, and we would just interview people on the street, kind of getting to know people, sometimes go back and get to know how their lives have changed, what they think about the changes.
And can you give me some of those stories, because you've got quite a lot of them in the report, which is, by the way, very very friendly. It's easy to read. This one, for example, you don't use names in your report. I think you call it T. Who used to be a gardener. You've got a picture of. Well, it's not a garden anymore.
Yeah. So the picture is it's basically her garden used to be this lush place. She would spend all her time there. 20 years ago, she had a terrible accident, was no longer able to work, and in recovery, she started gardening, and it was kind of her way to really get excited about something again. And just a month ago, a new landlord bought the building and just totally demolished the whole backyard.
Literally, it's like bulldozed.
Yeah, and so she actually said literally, it looks like a bomb crater.
It does.
Yeah, and talking to her, she was just so upset. This was her life, and it was a place where she got food from.
Right.
So in the summer, she would grow vegetables and herbs all the time, and she would give them away to her friends. So it was a really big, important part of her life, and that we don't see that talked about when we talk about new restaurants moving in.
Yeah. What is the connection between gentrification and food? Because that's really the question you were looking at.
Yeah.
And what is that connection, and why did you want to look at that?
Right. So, you've got these new high-end restaurants moving in, but what's moving out? Do the people who live there, who are often low income, where do they get their food? Has that changed over time? And what we found was that a lot of people, as their rent goes up, you have to pay rent, so something's got to go. And if they're already living month by month, week by week, they just stop being able to buy food. So they go to the food bank. They try to find specials anywhere they can. But at the same time, when the places they used to hang out in all the time, just the diner, when those close, they have nowhere to go. They have nowhere to socialize with their friends
There's
anymore.
a really interesting part about Dunkin' Donuts, which never occurred to me. Dunkin' Donuts as a community center. Tell me
That's
about
right.
that.
Yeah, so when we went to a cafe that was organized by a community group of seniors, and when we asked them, what are some places that have closed over time, and they shouted, Dunkin' Donuts. And apparently all of them spend their day at Dunkin' Donuts. It's cheap. You buy a coffee, you can stay there the whole day. That's where they saw everyone they knew. And now that it's not there anymore, they don't really have a place like that anymore. Some of them had to go far north to Côte-des-Neiges, to the McDonald's, where you could also just sit and hang out. But some went to Villemar, to a mall, and to hang out. But really, most of them just stayed at home after that.
It's interesting the link that comes across in all the anecdotes that you have in your report between access to food, cheap, affordable food, but also social isolation. And we've talked to many times the NDG Food Depot here on the show. But they're also an example of that. They've had to move around. They've had, now the church is closed.
That's right.
How does the lack of access to food and cafes and that kind of thing affect social isolation?
Well, it affects it a lot. You start seeing people who for example, there's one woman we interviewed. She used to live in Little Burgundy, and then she moved to St. Henri, and kind of, you could see she's moving further and further as rent goes up and up. And she said, 10 years ago she used to talk to all her neighbors. Now there's a new condo that has moved across the street. She calls it the Berlin Wall. And she says, we don't interact. We don't talk to the new residents. They don't go out of their way to talk to us. And I used to hang out on my porch with kind of my neighbors. I would invite them for a drink, and that doesn't happen anymore. So she is increasingly more socially isolated as her old neighbors have moved out.
Hang on, another story is that, about the community garden and how that has changed too, where people from more diverse communities are coming in, which can be read as both a positive and a negative. Right. How does this all play into, because it's really contentious. There have been acts of vandalism. I have spoken to a lot of the politicians on this, specifically St. Henri, who all say nobody's getting to the root of the problem. But how does all this play into the gentrification debate in St. Henri?
Right, well, I think an important thing that a lot of the community groups are highlighting is that we need social housing. If people are being pushed out, they need a way so that they can stay. Because that's where their community is. But we need more than social housing, because where you live, it's not just an apartment. You need neighbors. You need places to go to, places to hang out in. That's what makes a neighborhood, and that's a lot of these people who've been living for 50, 60 years in St. Henri. Their whole community is there, everyone they know. And the more people you know, the more you can find savings, the more you can find cheap places to eat. And so it's really important that that we kind of take a holistic look at all of kind of how people live in the neighborhood.
Well, it's a really interesting report, and as I was saying, lots of really wonderful, a real portrait of those two neighborhoods as well. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much.
My guest in studio is Vansintjan. He's a PhD candidate with the University of London, and he's one of two authors of this report on St. Henri. It's called Gentrification and Food, What's for Dinner in NDG in St. Henri. I keep calling it St. Henri, but the St. Raymond neighborhood is in there as well, and that's a portrait of the neighborhood, a bit of a history as well in that report. The research is being presented at 5 o'clock at the St. Henri Historical Society, which is 521 Place St. Henri, and we will tweet out a link as well. Here's Lead Tap.